Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome. I'm Kristy Barber and I'm the Leadership Projects Coordinator for the National Farmers Federation. I work closely with the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation on the Drought Resilience Leaders Mentoring Program. The NFF is very proud to be partnered with the ARLF to deliver the mentoring program and to host this webinar today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we all meet today on different lands across Australia. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we meet, work, and live, and recognize that this land has always been and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. We recognize their continuing connection to the land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. This webinar forms part of the Drought Resilience Leaders Program, funded by the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. ARLF would like to recognize a number of other program partners, including the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal, the Rural Economy Centre of Excellence, the Australian Resilience Centre, and the University of Southern Queensland. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the fourth webinar in the series. We'd love you to introduce yourself and let us know where you're zooming in from today and what country you're on. Please let us know and say hello in the chat box. If you have any questions during the session, please pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our very best to get to those towards the end of the webinar. We'd really love to hear your questions, so please do submit them. Very soon, I'll hand it over to our facilitator, Katherine Sullivan. We're very pleased to have Kath join us today. Kath is a national reporter for the ABC, and she has spent more than a decade reporting on rural and regional affairs across Australia. So on that note, I will hand it over to you, Kath, to introduce our amazing panel.
Thanks so much, Kristy, and hello to everybody zooming in. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal country here in Canberra, the national capital. We're home to plenty of failures that have been broadcast across the country. I must admit, I was flattered when Kristy first approached me to participate in this program today, but did feel slightly dejected when I learnt that, well, we're potentially the peanuts for failures. But I hope that each of you can learn something from today's session, and I'm looking forward to hearing about how our panelists have turned their adversity into success. I think that each of their profiles or bios have been put out to those of you who have tuned in today. So we won't go into too much about each individual. I think it's more important to hear what they've got to say so that we can learn from the experience in the virtual room. We're going to talk about using robots and insects to turn waste into things we can use. And well, I guess we've got an insect farmer and a cattle farmer. Everybody knows all farmers are all about soil. We've got Olympia Yaga, who'll be joining us from GoTerra, Peter Thompson, who is a farmer in Queensland, not far from Roma, I believe, and Caroline Rhodes, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Primary Producers of SA, a position you haven't been in for too long, Caroline. So I thought we might start with you, if that's okay. And I'm really interested in your experience in the grains industry, because for such a long time, you were one of those leading a charge against a moratorium on growing genetically modified crops in South Australia, something that it seemed like everybody around the world was doing, everybody around Australia could do, but not the producers in SA. What was that experience like?
Thanks, Kath. Well, a bit of history. So, like many jurisdictions around Australia at the time when GM canola was first approved by the OGTR, we had a moratorium put in place by state governments on the basis of a perceived marketing advantage. And that was really based on the precautionary principle to ensure that as new technology became available, that segregation and identity preservation strategies could be deployed. So those growers who wish to remain GM-free could do so. So that was back a very long time ago, and I'm showing my age, but I was certainly involved in the debate at the time. So that was in 2004. At the time, I worked for the SA Farmers Federation. And I think there was a general acceptance that growers across South Australia would eventually get access, and that as a means to build community trust and to see the supply chain respond, and really to better understand what the market reaction would be. It would be a temporary measure. Unfortunately, through the duration of that, despite a huge amount of interest as moratoriums started to lift across mainland Australia, it wasn't until, in fact, 2020 that growers were given the opportunity to access that technology that had been available. So it was a very long and protracted debate, but one that we learnt a lot along the way, and certainly have managed to succeed despite various setbacks along the way.
It's certainly been an achievement for those fighting to have that moratorium or that ban removed. You mentioned it was protracted. How did you cope with the setbacks? Were there times when you felt like perhaps walking away and, I don't know, getting a job in a shop or something, doing something else?
Well, obviously, you know, this is not the only issue that I was dealing with, but certainly it did feel at times that we wouldn't see, you know, a progress in the debate. Along the way, what happened was that by legislation, the moratorium was simply extended without any real dialogue or any opportunity to reconsider the very means by which the moratorium was brought in. That's just a function of politics, and I think everyone that works in the agri-political space understands that with a change of government comes fresh opportunities. So in 2018, when we did have finally a change of government, the opportunity to establish an independent review was really the first time through successive parliaments that growers across South Australia and indeed the broader industry could actually re-engage with the political class on that. And that really established an opportunity for GPSA, and my timing was perfect in the sense that I then came in as the CEO. I had a really clear mandate to progress this issue. And that's where we started rebuilding the team. So we got the band back together, all those scientists and others who had potentially lost interest along the way, or other advocates who had simply just moved on. I think what we really needed to do at the onset was to convince everyone that, yes, unlike the last 14 years at that stage, this was a genuine opportunity. And so we began to really build that team and to find common ground and to re-engage, I think, a broad cross-section across the political divide.
And can I ask you about the impact that this has had on you personally? Or, I think each of our panellists today are in careers or hopefully paid positions that reflect doing things what they actually enjoy and feel a genuine commitment to. But there must have been times when you felt a little bit defeated, and how did you keep that from spilling over from your professional life into your personal life, or do the two really blend together?
Well, I think over time, the experience I've had working in and around politics for the last 20 odd years is that if you don't take it personally, it's a lot easier to bounce back and to re-engage on issues that really matter. So I think at times what happened after the independent review was that we had a few false starts. So we had both regulation, the lifting of the moratorium, and then that regulation was disallowed. It was then reintroduced, that got disallowed, and then reintroduced again. So that was all in the space of a very intense 2.5 years. The thing that sustained me during that period was I just worked with some fantastic people, and I think every setback or every opportunity, we had a saying, never waste a crisis. So it gave us a chance to have another look at the way in which the campaign was being developed, perhaps learning about different values and really trying to regroup. And I think that's important because you can't change the world by yourself. You've got to have a really good team around you, and certainly finding a huge coalition of interest groups really was important to that. When we actually got the legislation through, it wasn't without its own quirks, in the sense that we then had to re-engage after sustaining a 2-year campaign in state parliament. We then had to re-engage with 68 separate local government areas or councils around South Australia. And I think that's probably where the endurance race really kicked in, because it was starting afresh. And that was really through political compromise where we managed to get a fundamental shift in the Labor Party in their approach to examining this issue, and that was not without courage on behalf of not only the shadow minister but the opposition leader. And it was about GPSA convincing them that we could align and we could frame this issue in the context of their priorities. So for us, it was about ensuring that South Australia remained competitive with our R&D and could respond and react to a changing climate. So that was really how we reframed a new generation of Labor MPs to get on board. But the compromise within their party room was that one last effort to ensure that there wouldn't be any market reaction was to divert back to local government areas. Quite extraordinary, but that's the art of politics at times, it's compromise. So we went right back to basics of going back to 68 councils to start from fresh. And I think that's where, again, that re-energising rather of a team around us was so important. You can't lose your sense of humour through that. So back we started, we wrote submissions again, did a road show, certainly engaged on a council by council basis. But then from that, the momentum we gained both within our membership, but also in the general public, we had by that stage front page on the advertiser editorials in support, had published so many positive articles that I think it really came down to having that momentum in any political campaign that's critical. And we eventually got there. So we endured the process. It was quite an ordeal in some respects, but I think once that principle had been established to enable choice, I think growers then, we took a back step because it just became another decision on farm. And certainly our proposition was that everyone needs that choice and that farming systems really are a decision made in the paddock, both with growers and their agronomists in the best interest of their farm business. And that principle carried forward.
Wow, you talk about dealing with the endurance of dealing with 68 councils, and then when you realise that there's 68 South Australian councils, you certainly had your work cut out for you. Do love a joke at the South Australians' expense. But at this stage, we might bring in Peter Thompson, because I know, Peter, that your experience farming, coexisting beside a coal seam gas project, you've had your challenges interacting with public office and governments, but you also wanted to focus today on the strength of the people and what that can bring when dealing with challenges. Do you want to elaborate on what you mean when you say it's all about the people?
Thanks very much, Kath. Yeah, it's in this day and age, we're really getting sort of caught up on the whole technology, instant answers, super connectivity, but there's actually a missing human connectivity. And I think we've seen, and I mean, here's a good example, we're using Zoom and connecting huge number of people together, but there's times through COVID that has really separated physically people, but then at the same time, we've had the uptake of the technology. So it's just making sure that we still retain a human connection, and probably just going to our story and failures. And you can look at things and say, I have no failures, or they're all failures. And one of the big things for me is, I mean, I've loved cropping, loved farming and grown grain crops for over 40 years. And then in 2019, we had our first major crop failure through drought. And there was that level of feeling failure. You know, we'd sort of done everything we could. I've always had a concept of the minimal amount of input or effect on the land, but at the same time, understanding that you can't just sit back and do nothing. And long story short, you know, grew wheat for 40 years and then started to think maybe we've actually been doing the totally wrong thing for the last 40 years. And that in itself is a pretty big thing to take on board. We've always run cattle. Back in 1988, we got destocked with brucellosis.
Peter, can I just jump in there? Sorry, to talk about this experience of drought and recognizing that perhaps you've been going down the wrong track or that you need to change tact. How did you arrive at that? It's not like you wake up one morning and think, oh, I wish we'd done this, or maybe we'll try that. Is it, or was it like that?
Actually, it's one of the really big things, and a comment I was going to make later on, but it's an ideal time to make it now, is that need to have a really good friend, a really good mate, or a really good partner, mentor. I mean, I'm really fortunate with my wife, Nikki, that she really questions everything, and I describe it in a wise and loving manner. Doesn't necessarily mean that questions are always comfortable, but I think that's really important in that dealing with change and resilience and whatever, is having someone else, the old saying of a problem shared is a problem halved. But if you can look at something like drought, and 2019 for us was just, it was a build-up of a number of years. So we were starting to question what we were doing and why we were doing it. And then we had a trip to the States, and I was producing a planting point that I was looking at promoting over there. While we were over there, Nikki had a significant health issue. I went to in Texas, a no-kill farming conference, and a whole lot of things just started to gel, and we had nature had come along, tapped us on the shoulder. And so some of it was sort of sudden. In the scheme of things, it's sudden, but basically we're still doing some cropping, but it's really livestock orientated. It's actually soil orientated rather than production orientated. Look after the soil and the production will follow. So yeah, it's been over a period of time.
It's interesting, isn't it? They say that sometimes good leadership is knowing when to turn your back on maybe a path that you've been pursuing, or even if you've spent lots of money and lots of time, to be able to acknowledge that perhaps a different path is the better option. I think that can be a really difficult challenge, and maybe you were fortunate to have Nikki there to help you, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I really am, and I can't stress that enough for people that, there are people out there that, be it your partner, your wife, your husband, your best mate, whoever it might be, but if you can find at least that one person so you can bounce ideas off, and even the thing, and your worries and whatever they might be, and you can turn them into, someone else will see it from another aspect. You'll be bogged down in the failure, when in fact it's more than likely just a signal telling you that you need to look in a different direction. And with that, even be sure of what your passion is. I think a lot of people think they know what their passion is, but when the chips really come down, that's that thing to question, what is it that you really want to do?
Olympia, this might be a chance to bring you into the conversation, if that's okay. I wonder how it was that you actually arrived at this decision that you could turn insects into something of use, turn waste into something of use. Did you need to bounce this idea around a lot? Did you have self-doubts, or were you just confident and knew that you were onto something? Because it's a pretty unique pathway you've walked thus far.
It is and it isn't, I guess. I came here because I didn't have a choice, and I had a passion that I wanted to pursue. So I love to farm. I don't come from the land, so I couldn't inherit a farm. And the pathway to buying my own farm was a barrier that I couldn't overcome. And so I was looking for alternate ways to create a sustainable business model, and insects as feed was a way to offset the sort of challenge of 70% of all production costs being related to feed. And so that's where I started. But maggots in a box is not unique. This has been, we've been eating and farming insects for centuries. It's not unusual. It's just different to the developed world, and we aren't familiar with it in this way. But to tie it back to sort of what we're talking about, how I got here and what it how it relates to resiliency is it's sort of like this understanding that to the point that Peter made around find out what your passion is. I thought my passion was sheep and cattle. The reality was my passion is farming and agriculture and farming systems and the creation of ecosystems that deliver regional value. So I don't really care if I'm farming cows or if I'm farming maggots. I want to be farming and I want to be delivering sustainable systems to regional communities and regional locations. And so insects gave me a vehicle to do that. And when you think about what resiliency means to take something that, you know, as a sheep person, you know, to reconcile like 25 years of my life wanting maggots to die, and now sort of the last 6 years of my life very desperately wanting maggots to live, like there's kind of some interesting stuff going on there. And you know, for me, resiliency is about your tolerance for pressure. And you are more resilient when your tolerance for pressure is higher. And you tend to have a higher tolerance for pressure when you have taken a learning mindset in the good times. So where you've really used your tenaciousness and your voraciousness for learning in the times when you don't have pressure. You've reached out and looked and spoken to everybody. And so using and leveraging that when you're having a hard time means that, sure, imposter syndrome turns up, sure, things fail and you didn't mean them to, but you are more focused on it resolving the problem than you are in being overcome by it. And so each time that you face those problems, your resilience, your tolerance for pressure increases. And so, you know, my executive will tell me that my tolerance for pressure is, you know, unfathomable to them. And that's been forged, you know, through a lot of, you know, life of personal and professional challenges, but it's based and rooted in a learning mindset and to learn.
Olympia, remind me, I have a teacher, I always remember would say there are no losers, just winners and learners, which I always hated. Anyway, you talk about your colleagues saying that admiring your tolerance factor there, but what do you do when you're relying on people who don't have that same tolerance or that same mindset, and you are looking at a challenge? I mean, we've spoken with Caroline and Peter about the need for team or the strength that a team can bring. But what happens when you're not exactly singing from the same song sheet?
Yeah, and that's really important. You know, like the challenge that I have as a single founder is that I am alone in this business. I can talk to my husband about work or I can talk to my friends, but when it comes to this business, the 47 people that work here need me to be the mermaid on the bow. They need to believe that I am there, that they need to believe that I'm going to keep them safe and guide them through the bad water, and that I'm going to take the brunt of all of the waves that come. And that's sort of just metaphorically the job of a CEO, but they can't ride those waves with me. I do need to create you know, a bit of a barrier between some of the challenges. And so what we do at GoTerra is create a mindset around the same philosophy, so that I can take the pressure, but they know how to manage the problem. And so, you know, where you can create an actual system of work where the leader who sees the most of the picture, and so therefore tends to have a better understanding of where the pressure is coming from, can help direct a team, and the team can leverage that resiliency to come to a good outcome. I think we've all been through difficult times. What we have to remember when we're managing people through difficult times is that each time they do that, so at GoTerra we're doing first in the world things, and what I'm asking my team to do every day is turn up to work, stand at the very edge and boundary of their confidence and take another step and do it with all of their expertise, not do it like let and throw themselves off, but to actually purposefully step into the void and use their expertise to be okay. And so you can find ways to do that in all business, right? Because it isn't about being on the same page, it's understanding how we get to the end of where we're going or we move through on the journey we have. And that's that isn't always going to be at the discretion of the person who plotted the line on the map. The job is actually to figure out, is that the right direction, and look for those signposts and change direction when you're being moved, you know. And I think there's that flexibility to continue to learn, keep the aperture really open, actually mitigates challenges and fear, because you're not going, I chose a path and that's it. You're saying, I want to go there, and if I have to go left, I'll go left.
And I guess I can see, Caroline, that you're nodding as well, and your questions are coming in. Thank you. We'll get to those in just a moment. But Caroline, just before we do, you're nodding along there, and I guess this ability to be able to be agile and to respond to the challenges has really been tested. I mean, you just look at the past couple of years in Australia with the restrictions that COVID has brought, and before that, Peter talking about drought. Did you want to add to what Olympia was saying there?
Well, I just think it really goes to the essence of what this session's about, and that is, I think, to build resilience is to overcome a fear of failure. And I think when you are in that leadership position, I wouldn't quite describe myself as a mermaid on a ship, but I like that one, Olympia. That was great. But I think in terms of understanding, I guess, where to be self-aware and to allow your team to step forward in times when you do have to hear that things need to change, or that you do have to take a subtly different direction in order to achieve that common goal. I think that's really important, and part of that is building that trust and building a culture around you that really places values of unity and passion and commitment at the forefront. So I think, you know, you can get really fatigued, and you can certainly you could take things personally if you allow yourself to see, you know, minor setbacks as being catastrophic to your goal. And sometimes it just takes someone to give you some gentle reminders, or to give a different perspective in order to regroup and to really try and chart that course, as Olympia said. I think that's some really great insight.
Again,
sorry, I was just wondering, like, do you really think it's important to get rid of fear? Because I think actually we need fear to make good decisions, and that getting the idea that we shouldn't be afraid is sometimes where we get stuck. But I just wanted to understand, how you think about that.
Yeah, I think maybe it's looking at the word fear. I think I mentioned it earlier, but a fundamental tenet, if you like, of any campaign is never waste a crisis. And I think it is recognising when something goes wrong, or something external to your area that you hadn't anticipated occurs, where there's opportunity, and maybe that is understanding that in order to embrace that opportunity, you have to admit where something has potentially gone wrong, and maybe in that context that's, you know, incorporating fear into that. But it is also about being willing to take risks and try something new. And certainly from your perspective, Olympia, looking at how you're evolving almost a whole new sector, it's fascinating, because you're a trailblazer in that sense. And I think it's a really good context by which to address this topic.
And Peter, I'm not sure, have you got your hand up? Did you want to add to the conversation? Oh, keep going. Your mute button. Yeah, that's it.
Got it now. Around the whole fear thing, I think fear is an essential part, but we're talking about goals before, and one of the issues I see is that we have far too rigid goal. You know, our goals are far too rigid, when nature doesn't operate in a rigid manner. It's very much a flowing sense. So it's that ability to go with the flow that may seem like, I feel there's too much of this, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. But I think we've been a bit indoctrinated with that, rather than that allowing plans to really evolve as they come along. So it's that provisioning concept that the next thing will be there. So having the confidence that the next thing, person, whatever it might be, will arrive at the right time. And that can only come from trialing So there's not a distinct thing that you can do other than just having that confidence that, and once again, going back to that support, be it a team, be it a person. But I often think of it, it's like for anyone who's driven a vehicle on a wet road, on a mud road, two-wheel drive vehicle on a wet, muddy road, it's power on, power off, it's slide, it's glide, it's go with it. You go all over the road, but you actually get where you're going, even though you mightn't be exactly sure how you're going to get there. So, yeah.
So, Peter, just on that topic, do you make appointments with yourself to check in and to take stock, or do you wait for the shit to hit the fan before you reevaluate? Is it both?
I think certainly I try much more to consciously check in, and I think that's an age experience related thing. I think when you're younger, you'll just think you can just keep going. The older you get, the more that you'll start questioning yourself. And once again, looking at the team side of things, I'm fortunate with the coaching work that Nikki does, and I think that's something that everyone could really benefit from, is that personal coach, the business coach, the personal coach, where you're actually, I've been fortunate, I've learned a lot of things by osmosis on that whole coaching side, where you do stop, question yourself and honestly question yourself. And it's going to be those things that say, no, you shouldn't be doing this, even if it's very much your passion. And Olympia, I loved your thing about, you worked out you wanted to be in agriculture and went from killing maggots to wanting maggots to live. I've gone from killing every last weed to wanting the weeds to live, to feed. So it's
total change in mindset. And just on that, Peter, we have had a question asking if you could just elaborate a little bit about the wilderness protection that you're doing, and how that contributes to your business there near Roma.
Yep. So we've got an adjoining property we bought about 7-8 years ago that's got a lot of natural wilderness country on it, and it is works in progress. But an example, one of the plans with it is, lots of you will have heard of exclusion fences going up everywhere and people excluding whatever the wildlife they want to keep off, whatever. We've got a concept of wanting to actually build a similar fence, but as an inclusion fence. So allowing and creating an area where natural balance can come into play. We may take we may do some, say, dingo number reductions or some kangaroo number reductions, but rather than that heavy-handed thing that we as humans seem so good at doing, is excluding something or trying to kill something or whatever it is, and not looking at what the processional effects are. So we're running it in conjunction with, so we've got farming, we've got grazing. You mentioned coal seam gas before. We're very early in the days of that. We've got that integrated into what we're doing. A lot of people find that really hard to comprehend, but it can be done if you go in with an open mind. I think we've got coal seam gas and wilderness protection happening side by side. To a lot of people, they'd be two pretty major extremes.
I think each of you are challenging some traditional thinking in your everyday way of life. I've got another question that's come through asking, how can we help farmers strive to be more informed and connected in order to build resilience? And I might put that to you, first of all, Caroline, and then to you, Olympia.
Well, I think through COVID, if we've learned anything, it is that we can overcome the tyranny of distance through digital connectivity and creating forums such as this on one level. But I wouldn't underestimate too the importance of networks and the ability to meet like-minded people, to collaborate, but also to challenge thinking and to really, I think, create those opportunities. And it's something that after 2 years of doing these Zoom conferences and other ways to engage online, I think what we'll see is a gradual appetite and re-emergence of that face-to-face traditional networking. But I think what I've always done throughout my career is really find out smart people that can, and certainly people I went through uni with after 20 odd years, you're seeing them emerge in various leadership roles. So don't underestimate the influence, if you like, of your peers, but also, the ability to build and forge really strong friendships. And I think that's what I've always loved about working in the ag sector, is that you've got a very genuine cohort and people that come from different walks of life or different production systems, whatever the case may be. But if you can find that common ground, and I think that's what I really loved doing the Rural Leadership Program a long time ago now, in 2010, was that I had the opportunity to build a network and to effectively grow with a group of people that are now close confidants, but also just a lot of fun to catch up with. So don't forget the human element in the team building and the networking opportunities. It can't just be all online or all on Twitter and hashtags. It has to be genuine, deep relationships, and that develops over time. So don't waste opportunities.
I'm going to go a little left field and throw something a bit different out there. I'm known for that, so hang on. So I actually think we need to go a bit higher, and because I think there's not a community or a culture or a cohort of people that are more connected. I think ag is very connected. We know each other. I have a farm in Cooma. I was at a camp draft in Amityville the other weekend, and we were all there, and everyone knows everyone. And there is no more connection than possible. But where we fail culturally is the pink elephant in the room around alcohol, around fear of failure, and the mythology we've created of the Australian farmer, who is this resilient person that can just battle and battle and battle. And we have told ourselves the story of the Australian farming family for so long that I submit, and I'm using my experience from the military community. So I was 14 years a US Marine spouse. During the war, we lost just under 50 friends in the course of 6 combat deployments. I know that a community that continues to battle gets tired, and you are exhausted and fatigued by continuously having to present front and centre to your community, which you are very well connected, and pretend you're okay, because you buy into the mythology that you just cope with this life, right? That this is what we do, we're battlers. And I think calling it out and just finding safe places and participating in changing the culture of admitting we're not okay when we're not okay. And if we think really deeply about our communities, when we say, how are you? We never say, not great, actually. It rained for the 50 millionth time and we've not been able to bale any hay. Or, this broke and that just, I'm really worried about it. We don't say that. We talk about the hardships in stories and we say, but she'll be right. And she'll be right becomes the whiteout of our fears, and it actually becomes just one more saddlebag to our ability to be more resilient. So I would actually challenge everyone to just participate in shifting our culture. Some really great organisations that are doing this well, I think, are like Active Farmers, Sober in the Country, and just sort of getting engaged with these organisations that are trying to change the language of this community so that we can actually use this deep connectedness that we already have to be better with each other and more present with each other when it's hard. When it's good, we're all there. And even when it's hard, we'll donate, we'll lend the tractor, we'll come and help out, but we don't dig in to the parts where it's dark.
At the same time though, Olympia, it's a bit of a fine line, isn't it? Another question came through asking each of you how you keep a positive outlook even when things don't go to plan. And I know, Caroline, you said never waste a crisis. It's always an opportunity. But just thinking about that line then, Olympia, saying, oh, she'll be right. It's entrenched in us to say, oh, the sun will come up tomorrow. We're a day closer to the drought ending. But how do you not completely fall in a heap and find that balance, I guess?
I think it's really important to bake in compassion to how you manage life. So as an organisation, we do a thing called the Human Factors Council, and that's every Monday. And all the managers check in on the humans. And you're always on the council. You don't go on there just because you're not doing well. And not doing well might be that, you're just having trouble at home, or you're, having a big project at work and that's causing pressure, or you might be having a really great day and you're cracking on. And we share these stories together so that we can be mindful of the people who aren't doing well, and we can be different in our engagements with them. If you learn from another manager that a member of their team has just had a baby and it's up all the time and they're having trouble with sleep and whatever, then when you talk to that person, if they're not, if they haven't been able to achieve something well, you change how you engage. You don't go, where's my stuff? You're like, hey man, do you need help? Is there something we can do? Is there support we can provide? It just helps you shift. And similarly, I think when we're engaging with each other in a community, I don't think you can start to face the problem and start rebuilding the problem without the retro of how you got there and the commiseration that it didn't work out. No football team finishes losing and then just marches off the field going, who's going for a beer? They sit on the pitch and they have a bit of a cry and they have a hug and they say, I can't believe I failed. And we don't give ourselves a lot of opportunity to do that. And because we live this life, there is no separation from our failure in our personal lives and our failures at work. And so that's where we get stuck, because when you go to work, you can come home and not feel that pressure. When your work is surrounding your veranda and it is bone dry or hasn't got crop or the trees are dead and you've destocked, how do you separate those without just sitting on the veranda and go, this is not what I wanted, and I need a cry, and it might need a couple of weeks to eat some biscuits on the couch and just feel wholly sorry for myself that I just couldn't pull this off. I don't think we give ourselves enough space to do that. There is a language in Australian culture more broadly, but certainly in farming, where we expect us to just shake it off and turn up the next day and carry on. And that, particularly when you consider drought, where it's a protracted period of time that demands resilience to keep going, that is unsustainable.
And Peter, do you think that narrative about the battler has been to the detriment of some rural communities as well?
Yes, to so many. I mean, I just detest it when we've got a drought, a flood, or whatever, fire, whatever goes through, and someone gets up on the TV or whatever it might be in this day and age and says our farmers, our whatever, are resilient, they'll be right. So you're getting it from that side. The other thing is that we've, as a breed, if you look back through the makeup of lots of people in agriculture, whatever psychometric testing you do, they come out as individuals. So very much that individual that then goes into a cocoon to protect themselves. And like you're saying, Olympia, I think it's really, really important that you are able to accept that, I look at 2019 and it was just bloody horrible. There was, and it built up over about 5 years, and you had to just stop and say, we've probably made some mistakes along the way. This is really difficult, but this is where we are now. And it's about looking to the, what the alternatives are. It just came to mind that we recently watched a play that some of you would know of, that John Gladigo from South Australia wrote and has performed in. It's called Kick Off Your Boots. Yeah, Kick Off Your Boots. It looks like it's likely to go around the country in one form or another, but it addresses just about everything that we've been talking about here, around passion, around how you can handle the tough times, that where your dreams lay, you name it, it's all in there. So recommend that to everyone to listen to and watch that, and it's entertaining as well. But sorry, go.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I'm looking forward. I didn't realise that he was a playwright as well. Look, we are getting close to the bell ringing on this session, all about resilience and turning your failures into success or never wasting a crisis. But I thought we might have final observations, might be as close as I get to my David Spears moment on Insiders. So if I just come to each of you, and perhaps you might have final parting advice or an experience that you want to share to all of those who have joined in today. And I appreciate everybody who said hello from their different part of the world and who's sent in a question. Kristy's coming for me in just a moment, but we might start with you again, Caroline, if you had some final words to part with.
Well, just to back up what Peter said, and I had the great privilege of going to the opening night of that play, which was an incredible production that John Gladigo wrote and starred in, and it was a beautiful event, but it was all founded on principles developed by Dr. Kate Gunn, who is a rural psychologist here in South Australia, and I certainly encourage everyone to look up ifarmwell.com, and it is in this principle of health and well-being, and that is to build some skills around resilience in terms of understanding how well-being and setbacks can be overcome in a way that is really accessible and written in the language for farming to address a lot of the observations that Olympia has made. So my closing remark would be that I think we are, as a community and as a sector, really acknowledging this and providing hopefully some resources that we can all tap into. And conversations such as this are part of that, but certainly the principles, as Peter said, in that play are really beautifully presented as part of that program. So I encourage everyone to look that up and participate.
Can't wait. Olympia, a final thought?
I just come back to the first statement. Your resilience is your ability to handle pressure, and sometimes your ability to handle pressure is really high and other times it is not. And I think recognizing that in yourself and understanding that that is true for others means that you can help both yourself and others better. And so when you see other people talking about things that you know would be stressful, sometimes you don't need to be asked for help to help. You can just drop in and say hi, and knowing that you've made an effort can sometimes just take some pressure off. Knowing or saying your own fears out loud can make it a safe place for somebody to share those. And so keep the aperture open, keep learning, and enjoy the ride, because she sure is beautiful.
Sometimes I think that's easier said than done, but no. I appreciate the sentiment. Peter, our last panelist, our last thought today goes to you.
Yep. Two things. One is that, as I've said before, it's just so important to have that other person, whoever that may be in your life, just so critical. And in the process of finding your passion, stand for it rather than fighting for it. We keep using this fighting terminology, which to me is so negative. It's about standing for what you believe in and just taking the time to work out what it is that you believe in.
Great. It's been really interesting. I no longer feel bad about being asked to participate in the failure webinar. I think this has been such a fascinating conversation, and like most combos of this nature, I feel like we're just warming up, but I will hand back to Kristy. My thanks to our panelists today and to the Foundation for having me, and I hope that it's been of some benefit, and I wish everyone the ability to turn all their adversity into, all their crises into never to waste a crisis, as Caroline would say. Got there in the end.
Thanks, Kath, and thank you, Caroline, Peter, and Olympia for joining us and that just great conversation. I think everyone got so much out of it, because I know I did. And thank you for everyone online who joined us, and the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund and our program partners for supporting this webinar. Before everyone goes, I just wanted to say we do have some applications open at ARLF for the Drought Resilience Leaders Mentoring Program. And we also have the Drought Resilience Leaders Development Program applications over for regions of Eastern Tasmania, the Katherine region in the Northern Territory, and also Southwest Queensland. So go online and check those out for more information. And yes, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time for our 5th webinar on March 17th, I believe. See you online.
Thank you.